Good morning, students. We've just started this new chapter that is essentially about the empire, which is considered to be one of the greatest empires that came out of Europe. Essentially, the Roman Empire, which had a long-lasting impact on the world as a whole. And we would be talking about the Romans and, of course, their biggest adversaries. That is, and of course, the historical adversary as well, the Persians, that is today you call them Iranians. Okay, now the Romans and Iranians were, as we go there, as were of course the rivals and fought against each other for most of the history. Their empires lay next to each other, so naturally, because their empires were next to each other, so it was very natural for them that. One wanted to expand into the territory further because naturally both of them saw each other as the hindrances and obstacles in their aspirations for greater glory. And in this chapter, we shall be looking at the Roman Empire, but we shall also refer in passing to Rome's rival, that is Iran. Now, if you look at the map, and again coming back to the map, students, like I said yesterday, please pay attention to this map. This is a very important map, though it looks so small, but has enormous amount of significance. You must, completely. You should have a photograph of it etched in your memories. Okay. Now, Rome dominated the Mediterranean and all the regions around the sea in both the directions, north as well as south. North would mean that is north of the Mediterranean Sea, that is that runs east-west, so north of it, and of course also the south of it, which would mean northern part of Africa. To the north, the boundaries of the empire were formed by two great rivers, the Rhine and the Danube. Students, these two rivers, that is the Rhine and the Danube, they have enormous historical value. And as you probably, and as you study and you go, whether in class 12 or even after that, every time you would read about the history of Europe, you would often encounter names of these two rivers, the Rhine and the Danube. Now, but just to kind of, as you can see here again in the map, the River Rhine is coming. It originates somewhere from here, and not very far off. It is River Danube, but just that because they originate, of course, like most of the rivers in Europe. They come out of hills, and but their mouths are different. That is, they end in different sources and different locations. Okay, now River Rhine, it starts in Switzerland and it starts in Swiss Alps, but it goes into, as you can see, towards the North Sea, and then actually falls into North Sea after crossing Germany and Netherlands, that is Holland. It finally gets into North Sea, and so that runs towards north, and the other river, that is River Danube. Now, that starts again in the areas around Germany, and then it's, instead of moving north, it starts moving towards east. Okay, and it finally falls into Black Sea. Okay, now this, both of them entirely different directions and entirely different, so naturally they have harbored and they have given rise to entirely different kinds of kingdoms and entirely different kind of history. Okay, but one thing very interesting about River Danube is that River Danube in fact crisscrosses, or rather passes, 10 European countries. Okay, it goes through 10 European countries before finally falling into Black Sea. So, it is, of course, happens to be one of the largest rivers in Europe, but also, uh, I think it is only after it is, I think it is only River Nile which crosses about 11 countries. Otherwise, no other river anywhere on the planet crosses so many countries. And of course, River Danube, as I just said, it crisscrosses 10 countries. Okay, so These two rivers used to be the natural northern boundary for, because they were massive river systems. So that used to form a natural northern boundary for the Roman Empire. And in south, because that is next to Mediterranean, that is not, that would be North Africa, and the next would be the Sahara Desert of North Africa, which used to be a natural southern boundary, because it was all desert. So it was no point whether for the Greeks or the Romans to really go beyond North Africa, because it is no point, you know, dying out of thirst in the Saharan desert. So, but it again, whatever Northern Africa was, it was again very rich and abundant in natural resources. The Again, if you look at the map, that is in the western part of North Africa happens to be Morocco. Then you have the countries of Tunisia and Algeria, and then Egypt. So they again countries which were very rich in natural resources. Okay, so these two areas were the natural geographical boundaries for the Roman Empire, and traditional had been so. This vast stretch of territory was the Roman Empire. Iran controlled the whole area south of Caspian Sea down to eastern Arabia, and sometimes large parts of Afghanistan as well. But large part of Afghanistan, Iranians could have it only under some very powerful rulers, because, as you know, even today, the people of Afghanistan, it has never been easy to control them. Okay, so it was always under someone who was very powerful, a very powerful Persian ruler, a very capable ruler, that Afghanistan could be, tamed, and you could force Afghans to behave. So these two superpowers had divided most of the world, and the Chinese used to call the Greater Chin, that is roughly the West. Okay. Now, Caspian Sea, a bit of Caspian Sea, if you uh, students, because you study geography, so I assume that you know about Caspian Sea. If you don't, please study about it. Okay, because Caspian Sea is the world's largest inbound sea. That is the sea that is surrounded by land from all the sides. But there are some very large rivers which flow into Caspian Sea, and that is the reason why the water of Caspian Sea remains very fresh all throughout the year. Okay. Now, the early empire. The Roman Empire can broadly be divided into two phases, early and late, divided by the 3rd century as sort of historical watershed between them. In other words, the whole period down to the main part of the 3rd century can be called the early empire, and the period after that as late empire. That is, the 3rd century would mean that is 300 BC. The major difference between the two superpowers and their respective. Students, this is going to be a very important topic. The difference between these two empires, the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire or the Iranian Empire, because though both these empires were extremely powerful, extremely strong, resourceful, very rich, um, but there was a great amount of differences uh, in how they used to operate, the Romans as well as the Iranians, that is the Persians. And you have to remember this very important fact in mind, that we are talking about a period when Iran was not yet a Muslim country, or it was not yet a Muslim empire. We are talking about a time when Islam was not born. Even then, the Romans used to have a different approach to most of the things than what the Persians or the Iranians used to have. Okay, so let's see. A major difference between the two powers and their respective empires was that the Roman Empire was culturally much more diverse than that of Iran. The Parthians and the later Sassanians, the dynasties that ruled Iran in this period. Now, since you would often come across these kind of words, the Parthians, the Sassanians, but you have to understand that the Parthians would be Parthia Empire was almost like it was very close to the Afghanistan area. Parthia, or the Parthian Empire would be in the eastern part of Iran, And today, the countries like Azerbaijan and Kyrgyzstan, these are the areas which form, or rather, which used to form the Parthian Empire, and then the Parthians and the later Sasanians. Now, where would be these Sasanians? Sasanian was, or it was the same that is present day Iran, but Sasanians are kind of always mentioned as Sasanians, and they are very important in history because Sasanians were the last ruling family of a non-Islamic Iran. Let me explain this. What I'm saying is the Sasanians were the last non-Muslim rulers of Iran. It should be clear now, okay? Because after Sasanians, Iran became a Muslim uh, civilization. Okay, so before that they were, of course, the Parsis and the Zoroastrians, and the dynasties, that is something, another fascinating subject. I wish it was there in your syllabus, and then probably in class once we assemble, we would get into it. The Roman Empire, by contrast, was a mosaic of territories and cultures that were chiefly bound together by a common system of government. Many languages were spoken in the empire, but for the purpose of administration, Latin and Greek were the most widely used one, indeed, the only languages to be used. So essentially, the major difference was the diversity. Since Roman civilization, uh, because you have to understand, Roman civilization was about two continents, in fact, three continents. One continent was Europe, where they originally came from. The second continent would be the West Asian part, okay, the areas around Turkey and all those places, because the West Asia, and then it would be North Africa. Okay, so the Roman influence used to straddle three continents, so it was obvious that people from different cultures, different civilizations, all of that was Roman. Okay, so naturally they had a huge amount of diversity. Different kinds of people used to work for them in their kingdom in very important positions, even not so important as well. So they had a lot going on for them compared to the Iranians, who were more or less a very uniform and a homogeneous kind of people mostly of the same race, mostly who spoke the same language. So it was a very uniform structure when it came to the Iranian empire. Okay, and the class of the East spoke and wrote, and of course, as the in Roman Empire, the two major languages that were spoken were the Greek and the Latin. Now, since Latin is essentially, it was a language which was earlier spoken in the areas around Rome. Now, Latin was, because you have to understand, Rome in its early years, that is, even before it was known as Rome, it was known as Latium. So naturally, the language that was spoken in Rome and around Rome came to be known as Latin. It is as simple as that. Okay, and Latin was always considered to be an important language in that part of the world, because Latin, even today, in fact, happens to be the official language of the Pope, that is the country of Vatican City. And because the Pope, who happens to be the head of almost 80% of the Christians around the world, if the official language of Vatican happens to be Latin, naturally, that is a language which, in some way or the other, keeps influencing most of the Christian world even today. So, we shall continue. Thank you.